When I did my PhD in the late 80s, I had to produce paper files of all my sources. Nowadays, I produce databases and mind maps. With HTML5 and JavaScript, it's easy to produce applications for mobile phones and then bring people along with you. This app lets you get a feel for the Dark Ages by telling the profiles of some 60 key historical figures. They face a lot of problems but come up with some pretty crazy solutions. In the Middle Ages, when they later worked through these solutions, they stumbled across the foundation concepts of science, including mass and doubt. Mass has gone on to be the modern kilogram, while doubt, or learned ignorance, is the foundation of modern science. This is Annie Lennox, and she was right when she said music is a phenomenal platform for intellectual thought. I like listening to the music of the time period I'm studying. I was looking for the roots of modern science in documents thousands of years old. As the story unfolded, the real question I had was why in the 21st century had we quarantined this information from our own culture? Who or what was deciding what we should be thinking? In 1985, David Byrne wrote the song Road to Nowhere, which is excellent background music for this thought. How is an information culture functioning with large areas of knowledge quarantined?
Well, we know where we're going, but we don't know where we've been. And we know what we're knowing, but we can't say what we've seen. And we're not little children, and we know what we want, and the future is certain. Give us time to work it out.
For me, the amazing journey is understanding nature. If you have science, you can say what you've seen. If you do physics before seeing it, it totally amplifies the awesomeness. When I was flying over the Flinders Ranges Chopper and first saw the quantum mechanical night glow, it was totally awesome. Knowing how different colours are generated amplifies the awesomeness. Knowing the maths of my scattering multiplies the awesomeness when you see these rainbows in the sky. How about the Higgs field and the newly discovered Mexican hat that explains mass? It's almost trippy. Gravity waves are totally awesome. We can actually hear a sound from billions of light years away. For me, the plasma physics behind solar flares is just so deeply awesome. Now, with all of this excluded from education, quarantined, we've wound up parking in our amazing journey and not moving forward. I see the app about the Dark Ages as a kind of rear vision mirror that will allow us to reverse out of the knowledge car park. It will solve the problem of
But we don't know where we've been.
you should review things to know where we've been in this video. We started off with an application for your mobile phone which reviews Dark Ages history, which itself is an entree to understanding modern concepts of mass, which is the basis of physics, and doubt, which is the basis of modern science. Modern science leads on to the exciting new fields of gravity waves, Higgs fields, scattering and quantum effects. If science is an amazing journey, then our current education is more like a car park, with our schools being locked into studying Newton and basing themselves on texts. If you go back to looking at mass and doubt, Maths has a historical origin in the French Revolution and a modern approach of just simply defining Planck's constant h. Doubt becomes the centerpiece of experimental scientific culture. Double-blind tests tell of a culture which is obsessed with finding robust truth. As you can see, science is on a journey, but education has become parked. It's a complex intellectual ecosystem with hundreds of moving parts. Music is a portal people can use to enter this world, and in a sense, I'm standing on the shoulder of giants. If you want to really mix it with the big concepts of science, maths, computing and music to understand what's over the horizon, you can't go past knowing about Jeff Hill. He was one of the original 4 CSIRO scientists who built Australia's first computer, CSIRAC. Using paper tape, he created the very first computer music. Seeing the problems in programming computers by setting switches, he created Interprogram, allowing you to program in English. When they speak of pioneers, he was one of them. As his son, I had a ringside seat. Besides the drive and dedication, there was a deep knowledge of theology and philosophy. Creating computer music and computer languages built a bridge between humanity and science. Now we know where the app is taking you and why it's taking you there. A journey from the Dark Ages to the dawn of science.
About 1,000 years ago, a pope died, then was dug up and put on trial. This point in history is called the infamous Cadaver Synod. This website is a timeline guide to this period of history. Clicking on this mind map will take you to an area where all the ideas are set out in groups. The Dark Ages were a complex and convoluted period of history, but it's this period that stimulated the creation of many scientific ideas. Down here we have a news feed of Dark Ages clickbait. When you go to the website, you can click on them and then you'll be taken to the appropriate page in the timeline. My favourite is the librarian antipope. An antipope is where you have not gone through all the correct steps, so your papacy is illegitimate. You know you've been researching too long when you find Santa Claus has punched a heretic. Now you would think that St. Nick's punch couldn't be linked to the turmoil that fueled the birth of science. However, the guy he hit, Arius, had ideas that were taken up by the German tribes and by Islam, who some 400 years later were key cogs in the Dark Ages universe. The timeline, which is linked at the end of this video, has some 60 key figures. I've grouped them by spheres of influence. The princesses were highly educated in abbeys and play a key role in this world. Now we'll just scroll through the timeline. We had Arius. This is St. Nicholas, and you can see I've animated his fist punching Arius. This is St. Clotilde. She's a Catholic princess who married a Frankish king and converted the Franks to Catholicism. Theodora started off as a dancer but rose to rule the entire Byzantine Empire. St. Boniface was an English monk who converted German tribes by chopping down their sacred trees. St. Mildred was a classic example of how the church and state were intertwined. She was both a princess and an abbotess. You have to read her story not to believe it. Constantinople was actually running Rome, but when they tried to kill Pope Gregory, they set it on a divergent course. Edburga was an abbotess based in England, but provided logistical support to the monks converting the German tribes. Bertrada, mother of Charlemagne, nearly reshaped Europe with her marriage plans. Pope Gregory III started to really break away from Constantinople. Pope Zachary reboots European history by crowning able administrators as kings rather than the direct heirs. Back in Constantinople, Empress Irene takes charge. Pope Stephen II can now get the Franks to invade Italy and fight his enemies. Pope Paul tried to get further assistance from the Franks. Antipope Constantine II met a grisly end. Antipope Philip only lasted a day. Pope Stephen III again tries to get the Franks to invade. Pope Adrian used forged documents to get the Franks to give Rome lands in Italy, later to be called the Papal States. Pope Leo ushers in the Middle Ages and the Holy Roman Empire by crowning Charlemagne emperor. Pope Stephen IV continues to build the alliance with Charlemagne. Pope Paschal. Pope Eugene tried to improve the professionalism of the Church. Pope Valentine. Pope Gregory IV fought the Arabs. Theodora is an empress in Constantinople. Pope Siricius II has the Arabs reach the suburbs of Rome. Pope Leo IV fortifies Rome. Ignatius is castrated so he can't become emperor. Instead, he becomes Patriarch of Constantinople. Queen Chutberga could not have any children, and this created a major problem about who would be the next king. She was accused of incest and had to plunge her hand into boiling water to prove her innocence. Anastasis, the librarian anti-pope. Benedict III, the real pope. Joan, a fictional popess. Fotis was a layman installed as patriarch. He excommunicated Pope Nicholas. Pope Nicholas excommunicated Photos and used a rising star, Bishop Formosus, to win over the Bulgarians. In Constantinople, Photos is stood down and Ignatius is brought back. Pope Adrian II has his wife and daughter killed. Pope John VIII thinks that Formosus is too big for his boots and gets him stripped of his bishopric. Pope John later on gets killed with a hammer.
When Constantinople could no longer provide naval support for Rome, Pope John founded the Papal Navy, with such fabulous ships as the St. Peter and St. Paul, and in 1823 built by Britain, the Immaculate Conception.
Patriarch Ignatius is out and Photos comes back in. Pope Marinus reinstates Formosus. Pope Adrian III again focuses on the Arab invasion. Pope Stephen V continues to fight Arab invaders and crowns locals Guy Spoleto and his wife Algiltude emperor and empress. Where Emperor Guy died, Algiltude imprisons the Pope, trying to have her 14-year-old son crowned emperor. Formosus was back in favour after his run-in with Pope John VIII 10 years earlier. Pope Formosus held out against Algiltude. He was rescued by the German king Arnulf, who Formosus crowned emperor instead. Pope Boniface VI was quickly swept aside. Pope Stephen VI had to reverse Pope Formosus' work, so he dug him up and put him on trial. Here's an artist's impression of the trial, with Pope Stephen accusing Pope Formosus.
Pope Stephen was then arrested, imprisoned, and then promptly strangled. We then have a succession of 4 popes who progressively reversed the work of Pope Stephen and reinstated Formosus. The last pope of this 4, Pope Benedict, rebooted the Holy Roman Empire with a new line of emperors. Pope Leo V's reign lasted only 2 months before he was thrown in prison by the next pope, Antipope Christopher. Antipope Christopher was thrown in prison, then both Pope Leo V and Pope Christopher were strangled. The new pope, Pope Siricius III, reinstated the Cadaver Synod, again condemning Pope Formosus. His reign marks a new age of the papacy. The following 150 years were dominated by popes from the same family, including Pope Sergius III's son, and concluding eventually with the sale of the papacy. We leave our post-Byzantine popes behind and jump 300 years to St. Thomas Aquinas. He fused the teachings of the Church with the ideas of Aristotle, a philosopher who lived some 1,600 years earlier. In an age of oracles and interpreting animal entrails, Aristotle advocated reasoning. The Aristotle that St. Augustine had access to had been passed down through the ages with all the cultural and historical aspects filtered out of it. In the 13th century, there was a consensus that Aristotle had pretty well wrapped up all there was to know about science. There was no more. Giles of Rome had to manage the conflict between Aristotle and the teachings of the Church. It turns out that the ideas of Aristotle didn't exactly line up with the teachings of the Church. He didn't have creation, resurrection. He had put a cap on the number of angels to be under 5,000, and he had no way for bread and wine to transform into any other substance. For Giles of Rome, this conflict with the Church meant that Aristotle must be incorrect, or at the very least, incomplete. So he came up with the idea of mass, something that would be conserved even if you crumpled or squashed an object up. He is patient zero of a truly contagious concept, mass. It is fitting that we finish our journey through time with Nicholas of Cusa. Looking back, he proved the foundation document of the Papal States. The donation of Constantine was a forgery. This showed the shortcomings of scholasticism, a system based on texts and dogma. Although Nicholas was a man of God, he appreciated the truth of mathematics and how you can find new information through experiments. His philosophy of learned ignorance is the spark which starts modern science.